Hi Narina, Bob Harris here again. Thought it might be nice to get an update about what's been happening here in our research projects the last year or so, since last time we talked. If you remember, we had some really exciting research projects. They've got even more exciting. We've been making some, what we think are actually quite new breakthroughs in understanding. We continue to work on our investigations of diseases of the central nervous system. And we've been taking some new avenues of research. We started working with a new disease, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a horrible disease for patients that get that diagnosis. There's no cure, and one that captured my imagination. So we started working on that with a prospect of applying new immunotherapies there. And then we've been following projects that actually my students, PhD students, have initiated themselves. They wanted to do. I wasn't actually so interested in them, but I would like to encourage people to explore new avenues. So I just had a PhD student pass his thesis, and the results of primarily his hard work was to actually come up with a new understanding of what happens when we play with the cells that are in the brain. So we've been using genetic depletion models to actually get rid of important cells, the cells we were interested in, the microglia, and to ask the question, what happens when they're gone? And in this particular situation, then either the cells can come back or they get replaced. If we can make conditions whereby the original cells can never come back, then the body doesn't like this. The brain says, oh, I need to get microglia, and I'm not happy without them. So if it can't take microglia, then it says, I'll accept macrophages from the blood instead. So we've been looking to see what happens when these cells come in and they find themselves in a new environment. Do they behave like cells in the blood, or do they now behave like cells in the brain? The long story made short is that they do adapt, but they don't adapt completely. So they'll never become bona fide cells of the brain, but they still retain some of the properties of the blood. I've got to say the most important thing, of course, and that's how we can then use this information. So what we've done is we've been able to then prove that you can repopulate an empty central nervous system that you've emptied of a cell, and you can replace it with another cell type that seem to adapt and seem to be functional. So why would that be important? Well, in certain neurodegenerative diseases like ALS, and we believe that one of the prime contributors to the pathogenesis are just these microglial cells, which become nasty. They become pro-inflammatory. They're the ones that start ripping the nerves apart. And because they're genetically, there are genetic mutations, which mean that they can never change. So it won't be. There are new methods for depleting these cells. You can use it using antibodies to certain receptors. They're commercially available. But what happens if you do those is you get rid of the cells, but then they come back, and it's the same ones that come back. And that's not going to be of any use if you're a patient with ALS, because you get rid of the bad cells, but then they'll be replaced by bad cells. So I've come up with this radical idea that you should then be able to replace those cells completely. So we get rid of the bad ones, and then we'll actually repopulate by injecting new cells, which are then not genetically programmed to be destructive. And all to do this, then we have in collaboration with another researcher, Karolinska, who's actually developed a way of taking blood macrophages and making them into brain microglia by applying lots of different factors. So now we should be able to actually use donor cells to make microglia, to put them into the CNS where we've depleted the cells we don't want there. This is a kind of a radical type of thought. Getting rid of all the cells, would that be dangerous? We don't see any cognitive differences in the animal experimental models so far. So we think that this is something feasible to do. And now we test this in our experimental systems to see what happens if we use donor cells that aren't then from the same individual. Would they be accepted? Would they live there for a long time? Will we get normal functionality in the central nervous system if we have donor cells? Will they be replaced? Will the original cells fight back and take over? And these are the research questions which we're answering at the moment. But if it will work the way that my hypothesis is, that you should be able to replace, then we should have the possibility to then take a diseased brain and actually reset it. It's like rebooting a computer or your mobile telephone when it's not working properly. You press a button and you start off again. So it's really just trying to stop the bad processes and saying that, well, let's see if we can start again with new players. Maybe the analogy would be better with a football team, where you take out tired players or injured players and you replace them with new. The team is still the same, the function is the same to play football, but you have new energy and new possibilities. Maybe that's a better analogy to explain. But the cells themselves have their own functions, but they also communicate with lots of others. So if you change the identities of them, maybe you change the language, but they're the same type. So I mean, we don't expect the languages to change too much. Maybe the dialects are different, but not actually the language being spoken. So the hypothesis is that they should be able to then re-communicate, but we don't know that until we try it. So, and these will be the investigations that we conduct to actually answer those type of questions. The challenges are really trying to see, can we do this physically? Can we actually, will there be any detrimental consequences? Obviously, safety is an extremely important issue when you want to do translational research. We start with our experimental systems. We want to go into patients. You need to get as much information as possible. The volumes that we can inject into the brain are quite small, so we need to be sure that we can get enough of the cells in. So we need to know whether we can inject enough of those in the brain as well. So we have some practical issues to iron out. But we have a few different approaches there, and in science it's always to have hypotheses, to test it. It either works or it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, you go back to the drawing board and come up with a new one. So we don't have one way of doing this, we have several ways of doing it. And the challenges then are just to find the optimal way, to be sure then that we have a case to be able to go and talk to the medical doctors and say, now we have an opportunity to try something new in your sick patients. So that's been really exciting, and it's been nice to actually get acclaim from the scientific world by giving us the chance to publish these high quality papers, and that's very nice for us. And on top of that, then another major thing that's happened is that we've initiated a new collaboration. We're always looking for new ways to actually achieve the same aim, which is to immunomodulate with immunotherapies. And if people come up with smart technologies, then it's always good to try them. So I have a new collaborator within the Karolinska Institutet who's come up with a new way of delivering silencing RNAs directly to macrophages and microglia. And we're very excited about this. She uses yeast, very simple baker's yeast, the things you use to make bread, and she modifies them and she fills them up with these silencing constructs so you can inhibit your gene of interest. And we're really excited about testing these in our neurodegenerative models to see if we can actually make a difference there. If we can reverse the processes and immunomodulate the environments, then maybe we can actually come up with a brand new therapy there as well. And it's very exciting to have the prospect of translating these into patients, and especially ALS patients, if we get the possibility. So it's exciting times, and it's nice to have hardworking people that are making all this possible. A joy for me as a principal investigator to see the fruits of their labors coming well. So that's about it. That's a little bit wrap up. Hopefully you'll feel a little bit updated about the continued exciting things which we have here for everything that we seem to achieve. Then another question comes up, and hopefully you'll check in again in the future, and we'll see what new revelations will come up.